Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by the Atlantic City Airport. Plan your next vacation now. Spirit Airlines is offering nonstop flights from Atlantic City International Airport to Boston, Atlanta, San Juan, Miami, and other exciting destinations. Visit Spirit.com. Had a good conversation yesterday with Adam Kaplan, and Geoff Mosher is back today as we got a variety of things we're going to get into. And obviously, as every day we do Football at 4, we're one day closer to training camp starting. Speaking of training camp, now we just had this conversation in the last hour. Apparently Miles Sanders came out and said, hey, we feel like we're an all-star team, right? That brings us memories of the Dream Team. Now, I think, though, the Dream Team comment was made while the Eagles were at training camp, which made it such a big deal. I hope this is separated far enough that it won't be really made a big deal about.
Well, there's making a big deal about something, and then there's reality versus the perception. Were the 2011 Eagles done in by Vince Young calling it a dream team, or was it just not a compilation of very good players to begin with, even though it may have looked that way on paper? I mean, obviously, B is the answer to that. So, I mean, I know people will make a big deal about what's said, but I kind of agree with you that you can't really take something said in late June, that is sort of hyperbolic in nature anyway. We feel like an all-star team, and sit there and, in my opinion, put too much into it. But I know some people will. But if the Eagles aren't that good this year, it's not going to be because Miles Sanders at the end of June said, "Whoa, this feels like an all-star team." I don't think anybody.
I agree.
On that. I don't think anybody on that team. By the way, I don't think it's like some people argue no, but it's a reflection that you feel like you've arrived, and I don't sense that anybody on that team feels like they've arrived and they just have to show up to win.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Now, when the backup quarterback at that time said it, it was like this dream team, and it just kind of got blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And think about everything going on at the time. I mean, I think they were coming out of the lockout, so they were signing players in the middle of training camp that were theoretically going to be impactful. I mean, there was I think Cullen Jenkins had signed with the team sort of around that period, if I remember, or they got a running back at the same time. They were adding players, and also think about that was Andy Reid. He had been to several championship games. He had been to a Super Bowl. They had Donovan at quarterback, that was Michael Vick at quarterback at that point, I guess. But still, there were some really highly accomplished players with a team that had some real high expectations. So it was easier to kind of say that for that team. So it made sense. And for this team, it's not the case. But I think that they know that. They know that they're not accomplished. They know that they've done nothing noteworthy, that other than winning 9 games last year after 4 the year before that.
Mm-hmm. Sanders is a guy, by the way, that would be up for a contract extension this year. I think he's an interesting case study to kind of start with as we head into this year, some guys that are kind of playing for a contract.
Yeah, we talked about this on the Inside the Birds podcast that dropped Monday morning. We're kind of doing a series on contracts. Started off with some of the offensive guys. And I think what's interesting about Miles Sanders is that it's almost like he has to have a mediocre year to come back to the Eagles. Because if he has a good year, if he makes a Pro Bowl, his price tag may get too high. And the Eagles may say it's just really 1 year that you were this outstanding, and we've got Kenneth Gainwell, and we have a lot of picks, so we'll let you walk in free agency. That'll help us in the comp pick formula, as opposed to, giving you $16 million a year or anything around that. Versus if he has a terrible year, then he's also probably not going to be back for different reasons, just not coming back. So, but if he get like, I don't know, 10, 1,100 yards and 6 to 7 touchdowns, and that's sort of mediocre now for a running back, could you see Miles Sanders coming back then on maybe like a 3-year deal with, that's not top of the market? Maybe. I guess we have to see how it shakes out. But there's a lot of Miles Sanders slander out there, and I sort of don't get it. I think he's better than people give him credit for. I think durability is way more of an issue than production. I know people like to point out that he scored 0 touchdowns last year, and it is really fascinating because there's 36 running backs who carried the ball as much as him or more last year, and he's the only one that didn't have a touchdown. But of those 36 running backs, he and Nick Chubb were tied for the NFL lead in yards per carry average at 5.5. So Miles Sanders does well with the ball in his hand. Mm-hmm. He didn't get that many red zone opportunities. For whatever reason, they like Kenneth Gainwell in that spot. They like Jalen Hurts in that spot. But so it's sort of like he's being knocked for not having that opportunity. But I thought he had, when he was asked, especially late in the year when he came back from the injury, I thought he played well.
Well, I think a lot of Eagles fans have contended that they haven't used Sanders enough.
Yeah, and, there were like 2 years ago, Doug's last year, when things were bad, they didn't have a lot of leads in the fourth quarter. So he didn't have a whole lot of fourth quarter carries. The team was down by a touchdown or two a lot in those games. So that's not his fault. He did, though, have several runs of 50 or more yards. I mean, he destroyed the Baltimore Ravens defense, the Steelers defense. He faced some good defenses 2 years ago and had some really good games on, again, not a ton of carries. So I think when everything is right around him, he's a good runner of the football, and he's behind a good offensive line. So, yeah, you can argue he gets like 3 or 4 free yards like the others do, but he makes the most of it. He will turn the Jets on and give you extra yardage, and nobody else on the team right now has what he has to be able to do that.
And that's a position, too, that teams just don't like to bring back. I think we've discussed, on other editions of Football at 4, is do the Eagles this year use up Miles Sanders with no intention of bringing him back?
Yeah, I mean, you would like to think that this year should be different for Miles in that if he can stay healthy, they should have some leads in the fourth quarter. There are certain games that are on the schedule that you imagine that the Eagles are the better team and that they could have a 10-point lead going into the fourth, and that's an opportunity to get Miles Sanders more involved. Go look at the Jets game. He got hurt at the end of the Jets game when somebody fell on that ankle on the sideline that he had aggravated, just come back from a few weeks before. But didn't he have like 24 carries for over 100 yards in that game? I mean, he showed that he can carry the ball 20 some odd times, be productive, and move the chains for the team. So again, will he get that opportunity? I would like to see it. I still think he's their best running back all around. He certainly needs to improve things like pass protection, blitz pickup like that. But, so does Kenneth Gainwell for that matter, and some other guys.
Jalen Hurts is another guy. I was on Birds 365 back a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, I don't know. And McMullen said to me, about re-signing Hurts, that if you're a middle-of-the-road quarterback, you get $30 million or more. And that kind of rocked me as of like, wait a second. Do you want to pay Jalen Hurts $30 million? But is that the going rate for what he's playing for this year?
Well, see, there's been a changing dynamic, though, with the middle of the road quarterback over the last 3 or 4 years that they don't get that kind of money anymore unless a team just, makes a bad decision. I think Jared Goff is a good example of a guy who did get money. I mean, they gave him the contract extension, but they sort of kind of realized pretty quickly and that he wasn't going to be the guy, and they were able to trade him to get Matthew Stafford. But let's see. There are a couple of guys I was trying to think of who you thought were going to get big deals and then didn't get it. Like Kirk Cousins is an example, right? Washington, and you could say it was a good move or a bad move, whatever. I don't know. Washington said, we're not going to pay him what he wants. We'll franchise him for 2 years, which pays him a lot, but it's not the longest, deepest commitment. And then they let him walk and go to the Vikings. And neither the Vikings nor Washington has really seen a whole lot of success, although Washington did win the division 2 years ago. I don't think Vikings have won the division with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback. But you're right that there will be a going right. I mean, Kirk made, $34 million guaranteed or 33 when he signed with the Vikings. So if it's not with the Eagles, Jalen Hurts may get an opportunity somewhere else and get a high price tag. I mean, what did Mitchell Trubisky wind up signing for? I mean, he's going to probably be a backup, but I'm sure he made money that's good, but not $30 million good.
Right. Well, Hurts is definitely going to be an interesting one because if he has, he's one of those guys. Like, everything's on the line for him this year. And what if he's, has the same exact year he had last year? Let's just say he's the same guy, similar numbers. They won more. Maybe they won more, but he had the same year. What kind of decision does Howie Rosen have then?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's got to be a lot of context to that. If they say, all right, Jalen Hurts isn't that much better, but we can win with him because we're much better all around and we can contend for a championship, then you can see him possibly not getting an extension, playing out the fourth year of his deal. Then maybe you talk about the franchise tag the year after that. But if he's better, improved, then that's the more likely scenario. If they're going to be a better team, it's probably going to be because he took another step up. Then you are looking at the idea of signing him to a long-term deal somewhere in that $30 to $35 million range, assuming he's not, unless he passes for 5,000 yards or something crazy, right? Mm-hmm. But you want to get him signed pretty quickly before the Joe Burrows and if Russell Wilson signs a new contract, or any other quarterback right now who's young and might be Justin Herbert as well, before those guys start to reset the number, which is already at 50. The highest is 50 with Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see what happens with that set of quarterbacks.
You got other guys who are in the similar situation, maybe not as high profile, but Javon Hargrave is an interesting guy because obviously they got Jordan Davis and the whole Fletcher Cox situation with his contract, and how they make the decision on what they want their defensive tackles to be moving forward.
Yeah, Javon Hargrave's in the third year of a 3-year deal. So he stands to be a free agent at the end of the year, and he's been a very productive Eagle. He shook off a slow start last year from injury, came on at the end of the year. 2 years ago. And then last year he had a Pro Bowl season and was, at times unstoppable. This is the type of player who's going to be on his third contract, but isn't old, right? He's just turned 29 I think 29. So I think it would be wise of the Eagles, and I'm sure they've discussed it, that you give him a contract extension now. Don't wait. What's the reason? He's a young enough player and a core player on your defense and a good player that you're going to want him on your team for the next 2 or 3 years at least. And so now I would have thought, I think going into the year, there's an opportunity to give him an extension. He's young enough where you don't have to kind of wait and see and, make it to October or November, which is usually when the Eagles, if they're going to give an in-season extension, their history is it's usually November. Tim Jernigan, Alshon Jeffrey. There have been some other guys that they've done that for in November. TJ Edwards last year. But I don't think with him you have to wait. I think it would be smarter to not let him continue to get closer and closer to free agency and get the deal done before the start of the season.
Slay is another guy who they traded for, had a kind of up and down first year, had a really good second year, and now he's in a similar situation.
Yeah, and he is a little bit older. More than a little bit older. He's older than Javon Hargrave. I think he's going to be 32 next season. So you do have to be a little careful with what kind of contract extension you're going to want to give him. But this is the last year of his deal, and the Eagles have neglected to use the draft or free agency to get themselves a young cornerback to follow in the footsteps of either Darius Slay or James Bradberry. So it would be very wise of them, in my opinion, to at some point this year give Slay an extension. Now, probably a short-term one, like a 2-year one that's going to have a pretty high number because the best cornerbacks in the league are making between 18 and 21 million. So he probably would be somewhere in the 17, 18 million dollar range as long as he's playing well. But you don't want to give him too many years at his age and then have to eat, kind of like what they did with Alshon Jeffrey a couple of years ago and really worry about that. But he's certainly, Mike, if you don't give him an extension, and James Bradberry too, he's on a 1-year deal. If he plays well, you might want to get him extended because even though this team talks about getting young corners, they never seem to do it. And you don't want to get yourself in a situation where you draft a young corner, you want to play him, he's not ready, and you already moved on from 2 good players. So I think you got to have these guys signed and then sort of groom your next generation of cornerbacks underneath them.
Yeah, Slay is an interesting one because, as you mentioned, the age there, where at what point the Eagles went through this years ago with Lito Shepherd and Sheldon Brown, where they decided, like, the Eagles had that hard and fast, if you hit this age, we're not signing you. And they did that with a lot of their guys. And for the most part, they were right. I mean, how many of those guys came back to burn them? None of them.
Not too many. Not too many, right.
Not too many, almost none.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that Dawkins had more in the tank than they were willing to admit. I think he made a Pro Bowl or two in Denver there. And their real failure on that was to just not find anybody else that, through draft or free agency that could even come close to being a good starting caliber safety. They were fortunate that they developed Quentin Michael, so they weren't completely, bare in the cupboard, but they found nobody to play opposite Quentin that could really get the job done. They ran through a lot of different safeties. But for the most part, you're right. Guys that they let walk did not have as much success as they did as Eagles. Now, all these years later, the Eagles are far more advanced with their sports science and taking care of bodies in a whole different way. And they don't mind signing some veterans who are over 30. I mean, they brought in guys like, Michael Bennett, for an example, and here James Bradbury they got. And even when they traded for Slay, I think he was either 29 or 30. So they have a better belief system right now in older players. But again, these guys don't get 6-year deals or anything like that. They tend to get short-term deals.
Anybody else in a similar situation where they're basically playing for an extension this offseason? We did see the Eagles, by the way, extend guys last year, Josh Sweat, Dallas Goedert. So they did go out and get guys, anybody in that boat, that realm, other than the guys we mentioned.
Well, the typical 3-year extension guys are really Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders, 3 or 4 year extension, like rookie contract extension. Those are the two ones that really jump out. But, they gave a 1-year deal for $14 million to Fletcher Cox. And I kind of related this to, what they do with Jason Kelce. 2 or 3 years ago, they were giving Kelce 1-year deals thinking this is going to be it. This is going to be it. This is going to be it. And every time they've realized it's not it and he's wanted to come back, they've had to pay him what he was worth. It's not like he comes back on a hometown discount, right? They pay him like the best center in football. So if Fletcher Cox, who wanted to be back and came back on a $14 million contract, if he has like a good year in terms of sacks and pressures and shows that he's not as declining as maybe last year thought, well, what are you going to do with him? Are you going to let him walk, or are you going to say this is still a vital part of our pass rush, of our defensive line? We need to bring him back. And if you need to bring him back, it's going to have to be at more than $14 million, because he came back at $14 million coming off an okay to subpar season. What happens if he has a better season? So I think that's kind of a fascinating contract to watch to see what happens with him.
All right. We know that the Eagles obviously went with a lot of 1-year deals, too, this offseason. So you had, as you mentioned, a guy like James Bradbury. He would be a guy that on that 1-year deal. Jaquaski Tart just signed. Well, he hasn't signed that yet, right?
No, I don't think he might have been today. I know he's supposed to come in and take the physical and sign it.
What was the TJ Edwards deal? Do you remember? Was that a 1-year or a 2-year?
So it was done last year, and it gave him, if I remember correctly, some guaranteed money that went into last year's salary cap number, and then a little bit. No, I don't think there's much left from this year. In fact, I think if he's released, there's no cap penalty except for whatever kind of money they spread out over dummy years. It wouldn't be real prohibitive.
Right. All right. We've got obviously plenty of time to look at the contract extensions, but not plenty of time before we get to training camp. That is happening in less than a month, my friends, and we have you covered here on Football at 4 tomorrow. Andrew, we take a look at the NFC West. We'll preview those four. We did the AFC West, maybe the most competitive division in football. Last year, we all thought the NFC West was going to be the most competitive division in football. You have Seattle, San Francisco, Arizona, and, of course, the champions reside there. The Rams, how will that stack up? Andrew will go through all that tomorrow. Adam is here on Friday. Tomorrow morning at 6 is the latest and greatest, the new edition of Inside the Birds. It drops at 6 o'clock wherever you get your podcast. So all our listeners who enjoy listening to Inside the Birds, it drops tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Adam Kaplan and that man right there, Geoff Mosher. All right, pal.
All right, Mikey. Talk to you soon. Enjoy your holiday.